أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سبح لله ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. له ملك السماوات والأرض يحيي ويميت وهو على كل شيء قدير. هو الأول والآخر والظاهر والباطن وهو بكل شيء عليم. هو الذي خلق السماوات والأرض في 6 أيام ثم استوى على العرش يعلم ما يلج في الأرض وما يخرج منها وما ينزل من السماء وما يعرج فيها وهو معكم أينما كنتم والله بما تعملون بصير. له ملك السماوات والأرض وإلى الله ترجع الأمور. يولج الليل في النهار ويولج النهار في الليل وهو عليم بذات الصدور. آمنوا بالله ورسوله وأنفقوا مما جعلكم مستخلفين فيه فالذين آمنوا منكم وأنفقوا لهم أجر كبير. وما لكم لا تؤمنون بالله والرسول يدعوكم لتؤمنوا بربكم وقد أخذ ميثاقكم إن كنتم مؤمنين. هو الذي ينزل على عبده آيات بينات ليخرجكم من الظلمات إلى النور وإن الله بكم لرءوف رحيم. وما لكم ألا تنفقوا في سبيل الله ولله ميراث السماوات والأرض لا يستوي منكم من أنفق من قبل الفتح وقاتل أولئك أعظم درجة من الذين أنفقوا من بعد وقاتلوا وكلا وعد الله الحسنى والله بما تعملون خبير. من ذا الذي يقرض الله قرضا حسنا فيضاعفه له وله أجر كريم. يوم ترى المؤمنين والمؤمنات يسعى نورهم بين أيديهم وبأيمانهم بشراكم اليوم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها ذلك هو الفوز العظيم. يوم يقول المنافقون والمنافقات للذين آمنوا انظرونا نقتبس من نوركم قيل ارجعوا وراءكم فالتمسوا نورا فضرب بينهم بسور له باب باطنه فيه الرحمة وظاهره من قبله العذاب ينادونهم ألم نكن معكم قالوا بلى ولكنكم فتنتم أنفسكم وتربستم وارتبتم وغرتكم الأماني حتى جاء أمر الله وغركم بالله الغرور. فاليوم لا يؤخذ منكم فدية ولا من الذين كفروا مأواكم النار هي مولاكم وبئس المصير. ألم يأن للذين آمنوا أن تخشع قلوبهم لذكر الله وما نزل من الحق ولا تكونوا كالذين أوتوا الكتاب من قبل فطال عليهم الأمد فقست قلوبهم وكثير منهم فاسقون. اعلموا أن الله يحيي الأرض بعد موتها قد بينا لكم الآيات لعلكم تعقلون. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Abbas Merchant, and I've composed a spoken word poetry on the friendship of Imam Hussain and Hazrat Habib ibn Mudahir alayhi salam. Salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Last year, on the Friendships Day, my friend gave me a card that says, "True friends will go a long way." Reading this card made me smile, but sadly took me back in time to when a friend supported a friend with his life. The friends were Hussein and Habib, son of Mudahir, who used to live in Medina together and had lots of love and respect for each other. Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet, when used to walk his way to the masjid, Habib would collect the dust from his footsteps. Then on his body, he would lovingly spread. Now let us fast forward to 61 Hijrah, when to defend Islam, Prophet's grandson stood out. Along with his family, he was surrounded in Karbala. Thousands of soldiers kept marching in the land. Hussein just had few courageous men on hand. Seeing the situation, he called out to his friend. In the letter to Habib, my Imam wrote, "The army has surrounded us from land to shore. You would be able to help in this time, I hope." Habib received the letter while he was having his food. Upon reading it, he hastily stood and sent out his slave and horse to the woods. When night fell upon the curfewed city of Kufa, Habib left his home to meet his Aqa. Sneakily, he started his journey to Mawla. When Imam Hussain saw Habib, he could not contain his emotions. Bibi Zainab sent salams as a beautiful notion. The friends then decided their plan of action. On the day of Ashura, when Habib went out to fight, last time the friends hugged each other so tight. Habib then ferociously attacked the army's plight. One after the other, the ranks of enemies got killed. But by then Habib was severely injured. He then fell to the ground and bid this world farewell. He gave his life to support his friend, who set out of his home in Islam's defense. History would forever remember these friends. La'natullahi ala al-qawm al-dhalimeen. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Wa Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa ala al-Farad. होने लगी हुसैन पे जब हुर की जान सार, दिल को पकड़ के दिए सदा शाह नामदार। कदमों पे जान देने को ये हुर है बेकरार। कदमों पे जान देने को ये हुर है बेकरार। जख्मी तमाम जिस्म है, आँखों में है गुबार। शर्मिंदा हूँ मैं फातिमा ज़हरा के लाल से, वादा वफा करूँगा मोहम्मद की आल से। वादा वफा करूँगा मोहम्मद की आल से। और बेचैन सुन के हो गए शबीर ये सदा, आँखों में अश्क भर के कहा ज़ामिन हो खुदा। कौसर पे देंगी फातिमा ज़हरा तुम्हें शिफा। कौसर पे देंगी फातिमा ज़हरा तुम्हें शिफा। हुर तेरी मग़फ़िरत की सनद अब है करबला। ज़ैनब ने सर को पीट लिया सुन के ये कलाम।
بولی سنبھالے خود کو ذرا اے شہ انام، بولی سنبھالے خود کو ذرا اے شہ انام، اور آئی صدا یہ خلد سے حیدر کی میرے لال، راضی ہوا ہے حر سے خدا اور نبی کی آل، شبیر پر یوں جان لٹانا ہے ایک کمال، شبیر پر یوں جان لٹانا ہے ایک کمال، اب حر کا نام حشر تلک ہوگا لازوال، یہ سن کے حر کے چہرے پہ ایک نور آ گیا، جیسے قدم کو چومنے تھا طور آ گیا، جیسے قدم کو چومنے تھا طور آ گیا، اور زانوں پہ جب حسین کے سر حر کا آ گیا، صفدر نگہ میں حر کی اندھیرا سا چھا گیا، دل پر حسین کے کوئی خنجر لگا گیا، دل پر حسین کے کوئی خنجر لگا گیا، ایک درد کربلا کی زمین میں سما گیا، خیموں میں یوں ہی آخری پہنچی صدائے ہوئے، زینب نے سر کو پیٹ لیا کہہ کے ہائے ہوئے، زینب نے سر کو پیٹ لیا کہہ کے ہائے ہوئے، زینب نے سر کو پیٹ لیا کہہ کے ہائے ہوئے۔ بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات، اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد وعجل فرجهم۔ سورة المبارکۃ۔
اعوذ باللہ من الشیطان اللعین الرجیم، بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم، الحمد للہ رب العالمین، الحمد للہ الذی ہدانا لہذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله، ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد، اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا، أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه تبارك وتعالى في محكم كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، إن في خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف الليل والنهار لآيات لأولي الألباب الذين يذكرون الله قياما وقعودا وعلى جنوبهم ويتفكرون في خلق السماوات والأرض ربنا ما خلقت هذا باطلا سبحانك فقنا عذاب النار صدق الله العلي العظيم. One of the other issues that commonly is a question posed to Muslims and is in the minds of believers is the issue of the compatibility between Islam and science, or more generally between religion and science. This is because history has shown that there have been instances where religion seems to be against scientific discovery and scientific progress. And therefore tonight, inshallah, we want to discuss this issue and try and show that indeed there is a compatibility between Islam and science. The verse that I have quoted in the beginning is from Surah Al Imran, verse 190 and 191, where those who are true believers and those who are considered people of wisdom are those who think about what they see around them in nature, and they remember Allah Azzawajal. وَيَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. They think about the creation of the heavens and the earth. And so we find even in the traditions that contemplation, meditation, reflection, cogitation, all these things have been encouraged. In fact, there is a hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi that says, فِكْرَةُ سَاعَةٍ خَيْرٌ مِّنْ عِبَادَةِ السَّنَةِ. 1 hour of meditation, of reflection, of thinking about the creation of Allah Azza wa Jal is better than 1 year's worship. Why? Because when you think about these things, then that realization that we are servants of Allah and the realization of the majesty of Allah Azza wa Jal becomes ingrained into our hearts. We become believers and we attain certitude in our belief by reflection and by pondering. Now, when it comes to science, because our subject is the compatibility between Islam and science, the term science, according to Sayyid Hussein Nasr, is not equivalent to the Arabic ilm or to the Persian danish. Why? Because ilm in Arabic is far more general and encompasses not only the empirical sciences but also metaphysical teachings that are beyond the scope of the material world. Describing modern science, Sayyid Hussein Nasr says, one of the fundamental features of modern science, like modern philosophy, is its profane character. That is, its divorce of knowledge from the sacred. So this is a very interesting quote and something that we should reflect upon. Sayyid Hussein Nasr says that modern science, like modern philosophy, is profane in its character, meaning that it does not consider the sacred. It does not consider Allah Azza wa Jal, the creator, the holy. Rather, it tries to divorce knowledge from the sacred. And that is what makes it profane in its character. In Islam, the question is, does Islam promote science, empirical science, like biology, like chemistry? Does Islam have anything to say about it? Does the Holy Quran mention anything that would guide us in the direction of science, for example? The answer to this question is a resounding yes. And there are many verses in the Quran. Let us look at one example. From Surah Al-Ghashiyah, Allah Azza wa Jal tells us, أَفَلَا يَنظُرُونَ إِلَى الْإِبِلِ كَيْفَ خُلِقَتْ. Do they not observe the camel and see how it has been created? A beautiful verse that makes people look at one creature amongst the entire creation and observe it. Allah says, observe it and see how it was created. Now, the example of the camel was given here probably because it was the most accessible animal for the Arabs. The Arabs had camels with them in the desert. They were desert dwellers, so camels were very common. When we look at the camel, we find that it is a very unique creature. It can go 17 days without water. And when it does come to a water source, it can drink up to 120 liters of water in 7 to 8 minutes. Scientists calculated and said if human beings were to drink water at this speed, they would be intoxicated by water. They would suffer water intoxication, because drinking water at this speed and in this quantity can cause problems. But the camel has this ability that when it does find a water source, it quickly drinks in a large quantity of water, and then it can go on for up to 17 days without any water. And the beauty of the creation of the camel also is that when you look at the hooves of the camel, they have been shaped in such a way and made in such a way that it can traverse the soft, hot sands of the desert without any problem. Furthermore, you look at the eyes of the camel, the eyelashes and the eyebrows of the camel are made in such a way that it can protect the eyes from desert storms. You know, as you traverse in the desert, sometimes you come across sandstorms, and the eyes of the camel are such that it can be protected by its eyelashes and eyebrows from these kinds of storms. Furthermore, the ears of the camel are full of hair, again protecting its ears from the sand. And its nostrils have muscles that enable it to close the nose when such sandstorms do occur. Camels also have this ability to remember the place in which they found water before. So watering holes, the oases in the deserts, are places once a camel sees it, it remembers and knows where water can be found. Now these are some examples looking back to the verse of the Holy Quran that says, do you not observe the camel and see how it was created? Now, how do we know these things? We know these things through a process of empirical study. You need to go to the camel, you need to study the camel, look at it, observe it, look at how it protects itself during sandstorms and so on and so forth. Look at the kind of food that it eats. And so this is all a scientific process. This is a process that we use today in science. And so the Holy Quran, therefore, is totally encouraging human beings to participate in these kinds of scientific discoveries. Now, when we come to Islam, if we want to expand our discussion a little and begin talking about Islam and the intellect, because science and scientists today try and argue that science is the best way to attain understanding of the truth because it uses the intellect and the aql that human beings have. And so when we come to the intellect, we find again Islam amongst all other religions is unique in that it encourages people to use their intellects. It describes the intellect as a blessing of Allah Azzawajal. There are many traditions that talk about the intellect in this light. For example, we have one tradition where Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi was approached by someone and asked, Mal aql, what is the intellect? He replied, Ma ubida bihi ar-Rahman wa ktusiba bihi al-Jinan. The intellect is that by which the most merciful Lord is worshipped and by which paradise can be acquired. That means that Allah Azzawajal is supposed to be worshipped intellectually, through understanding, through reason. We are not supposed to have blind worshipping, doing things as a ritual without understanding why we are doing them. And so this is very important. Of course, we have one tradition that states, أَوَّلُ مَا خَلَقَ اللَّهُ الْعَقْلِ. The first thing that Allah created was the aql, was the intellect. And these traditions therefore highlight the importance of aql, the importance of the intellect. Now, scholars also have a very interesting dictum and principle in which they say, كُلَّمَا حَكَمَ بِهِ الْعَقْلِ حَكَمَ بِهِ الشَّرْعِ. Everything that the intellect judges to be true, the law of Allah Azzawajal also judges to be true. Meaning that the law and the sharia that Allah Azzawajal has sent for human beings is in accordance with the intellect. It is not counterintuitive. It is not against rationality and logic. This is very important for us to understand. Let us look at one example of this. When we come to the issue of usury or interest, what is known as riba in Arabic, we find that it is something that Islam prohibits. The prohibition of riba is something logical, and it is something rational. And that is why when we look at history, we find that it has been prohibited and it has been considered something that ought to be forbidden from the earliest of times. If you look at Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, he himself explained the problem of riba or of usury. He said that money is not meant to beget money. Money exists not by nature but by law. It was intended to be used in exchange but not to be increased through interest. Because interest is birthing money from money. And how can money give birth to money? Now, this is very interesting, and we find that though in the world today interest is very common, and in fact it is very difficult to find any kind of financial system which is completely interest free. However, the problems brought about by interest are very serious, and this is something that we are now realizing. All these bubbles that burst, financial bubbles that cause problems for human beings, and all these collapses of financial institutions are simply because we are trying to make money from money. Money intrinsically has no value. It is a piece of paper. It is us who give value to it. And so when you try to increase its value, in the olden days, at least when they had coins made from silver and gold, the silver and gold itself, being precious metals, had value. But the paper that we use today has no intrinsic value. We give it value. It has value by law, not value by nature. And so this is something that even Aristotle mentioned. Now, when you turn to the Old Testament, even the Old Testament forbids the Jews from taking interest from fellow Jews and discourages them from taking interest from anyone else, from strangers, from non-Jews. So, the Old Testament also forbids usury and interest. If you come to the Code of Hammurabi, a very old code, 2000 years BC and earlier, even in the Code of Hammurabi, usury was limited to 33%. They had to limit it because they saw how detrimental usury and riba is. When we come to the Hindu law, Damdupat says limiting interest is necessary when it comes to loans. You have to limit the interest. When it comes to Roman law, in the 6th century, the Justinian Code reduced usury to 12.5%. It was limited to 12.5%. The Magna Carta as well places limits on usury, and this happened in 1215 AD. Even in the United States, until 1981, there were limits placed on usury and interest. So we note that it is something very rational and it is something very logical that interest is detrimental to the economic well-being of a society, and that is why even all these other religious and non-religious groups and entities try to limit or restrict or forbid usury. And so when the Quran says that riba is forbidden, وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَا, He has forbidden usury, He has forbidden riba, He has made trade permissible, but riba is forbidden. Now when we look at this, we realize that this is not something unique and it is not something counterintuitive, it is something very logical. And the proof of it being logical is that human beings had understood and had seen how detrimental usury can be, and that is why they had tried to limit or restrict it even earlier. Now in Islam, there are numerous examples of how even within the courts and the judicial systems, logic played a very strong role in helping to adjudicate different matters. There is an anecdote about Iyas al-Basri. Iyas al-Basri was a very famous judge, and he is said to have been very intelligent, and many times he solved many of his cases using intelligence and logic and simple common sense reasoning. For example, there is one case mentioned where Iyas was approached by two individuals. One was the plaintiff and the other was the accused. The plaintiff was saying that I had loaned the accused money, but he now refuses to pay back the money and says I never loaned him anything. And so when Iyas tries to adjudicate and judge between the two, he asks the man that, do you remember taking money from this person? The man says, no, I don't recall ever taking money from him. And so Iyas asks the plaintiff that, you say that he took money from you. Do you remember if there was a landmark anywhere nearby the place where you met and you gave him the money? So the man says, yes, I remember there was a large tree there. So Iyas says, maybe your money fell down somewhere in the vicinity of that landmark. Why don't you go there and check? And so the man goes. In the meantime, the accused is still in the court of Iyas. He tells him to step on one side and he continues adjudicating other cases. After a while, he turns to the accused and asks him that, do you think that man, that plaintiff, has reached the landmark? The accused says, no, that was very far away. Immediately Iyas says, aha, so you know that landmark. That means he did indeed give you the money there. And this is how he solves the case, and the accused was found guilty. So this is something very logical, and we find that indeed Islam promotes this kind of logical reasoning and common sense. There is a saying in Arabic that goes, إن كنت لا تدري فتلك مصيبة وإن كنت تدري فالمصيبة أعظم. If you do things that are wrong without knowledge, if you don't have knowledge about something, then that is a musibah, that is a tribulation. But if you have knowledge of it and you do things that are wrong, then the musibah is greater. The tribulation is even greater. The problem that we find is that many individuals, and this problem is there even today, many individuals don't know, but they don't know that they don't know. And this is called compound ignorance. A person does not know, but he or she thinks that they know. That means they don't know that they don't know. And that is compound ignorance. And when people think that they know, when they don't truly know, then they make decisions and they make judgments that are completely counterintuitive, that are completely illogical. And that is very important. And so the whole idea of humility when it comes to knowledge, when it comes to learning, when it comes to discovery is very important. The famous Sunni scholar Shafi'i, he says a very interesting thing. He says, وَإِذَا مَزْدَدْتُ عِلْمًا زَادَنِي عِلْمًا بِجَهْلِي. Whenever I grow in knowledge, I only grow in knowledge of my own ignorance. That means the more I learn, the more I realize how ignorant I am. This is the attitude that is required by Muslims who acquire knowledge. They don't have to be haughty in the little that they have learnt. A person has learnt something very little and they are so proud of what they have learnt. That is not the right attitude according to Islam. And it is this haughtiness and this arrogance that leads people to think that if anything is beyond their comprehension, then it must be wrong. Anything that they cannot understand must be wrong. That is a very arrogant attitude. Do you think you have the capability to understand everything under the sun? You are a human being. There are many things that require years of training for you to be able to understand them. And so before you go about rejecting things simply because you cannot comprehend or it doesn't make sense to you, which is a very arrogant attitude to begin with, try and remain humble and continue studying and going in the depth of things and pray to Allah Azzawajal to enable you to understand those things that seemingly are against what you would expect to be true or are illogical in your eyes. Pray to Allah and He will enable you to understand. So there has to be humility in the whole process of gaining knowledge. And that is why people like Ibn Sina, who was a very great scholar and philosopher, have given very interesting principles and guidelines on what to do when you hear something that seems far-fetched, that seems illogical, that seems impossible. He says, كل ما قرع سمعك من الغرائب فذره في بقعة الإمكان ما لم يضدك عنه قائم البرهان. When you hear something that seems to be impossible, min al-gharaib, it is gharib, it is something that is strange to you, then place it in the realm of possibility. Say to yourself, it is possible. Don't reject it outright because it is strange to you. As long as you don't have evidence, strong evidence, burhan, to show that what you have heard is wrong. If you have evidence to show that what you have heard or what has been related to you is not correct, then that is a different story. But as long as you don't have evidence, then you should not reject anything. This is very important. So even if something seems illogical, take your time and don't dismiss it immediately. Think about it. Pray to Allah Azzawajal to guide you regarding it. Once you have a dalil, a burhan, then you can take a stance. And this is what the Quran also says when discussing with those who are polytheists. The Quran tells them, أَمَّنْ يَبْدَأُ الْخَلْقَ ثُمَّ يُعِيدُهُ وَمَنْ يَرْزُقُكُم مِّنَ السَّمَاءِ وَالْأَرْضِ أَإِلَٰهٌ مَّعَ اللَّهِ قُلْ هَاتُوا بُرْهَانَكُمْ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. Is He who originates the creation, then He will bring it back, and who provides for you from the sky and the earth. Is there a God besides Allah? Say, produce your evidence if you are truthful. Produce your evidence. The common dictum amongst scholars in the seminary is نحن أبناء الدليل نميل حيث يميل. We are the followers of evidence. We turn whatever direction the evidence turns. This is very important. So we always have to use evidence. And I don't understand, I don't think it is correct, it doesn't make sense to me, is not evidence. You need to bring evidence before rejecting and also before accepting anything that you hear. And this is what Islam promotes. And that is why there is no taqleed when it comes to aqaid. There is no taqleed or blind following when it comes to matters of belief and creed. This is very important. The Quran tells us very clearly, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمُ اتَّبِعُوا مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ قَالُوا بَلْ نَتَّبِعُ مَا أَلْفَيْنَا عَلَيْهِ آبَاءَنَا أَوَلَوْ كَانَ آبَاؤُهُمْ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ شَيْئًا وَلَا يَهْتَدُونَ. When they are told, follow what Allah has revealed, they say, no, we will follow what we have found our forefathers following. What? Even if their fathers neither exercised their reason nor were they guided? Meaning that will they still follow their forefathers even if they didn't use reasoning and they were misguided? This kind of following has been rejected in Islam. And so when it comes to matters of belief, it is something that we have to understand logically, intellectually, and then we have to believe. So belief comes after understanding with the aql. This is very important. There is one anecdote of an old man who was seated on the pulpit one day and he was preaching, and he said that we believe that Allah has hands, Allah has a face, because whatever the Quran states, we take the apparent meaning of the Quran as hujjah, as authoritative. So the Quran says that Allah has a face, so we believe He has a face. The Quran says Allah has hands, we believe He has hands. Of course, as Muslims, we take these kinds of verses metaphorically. We don't believe that Allah has hands or a face. Now, this old preacher was trying to say, no, we have to take the apparent meaning of the Quran. The apparent meaning is He has hands, He has a face. Whatever the Quran says, we take its apparent meaning. A man raised his hand and said, Ya Shaykh, I have a question for you. He says, yes, go ahead. He said, Shaykh, then you are in big problems. Because you are a blind man, and the Quran explicitly states, Man kana fi hadhihi a'ma, fahuwa fil akhirati a'ma wa adallu sabila. Whoever is blind in this world will be blind in the hereafter and more astray from the path. Because you are blind, and you said we have to take the meanings of these verses apparently. You take the apparent meaning, and you don't have to go and look for the deeper meaning. And so, according to the apparent meaning of this verse, you, being a blind man, will be blind in the hereafter as well. And so the Shaykh could not reply, because this verse does not mean physical blindness. It means spiritual blindness. And that can only be understood by those who truly understand the meanings and the deeper meanings and the metaphorical meanings of such kinds of verses in the Holy Quran. When we follow blindly, then we are always led astray. We all know the story of the man, his son, and the donkey who were traveling together, and as they came to one group of people who began laughing at them and talking about them and saying, look, the man has a donkey but he doesn't ride it. So he began riding the donkey. A short while later, they came across some other people and they said, look at the man, he is so merciless. His poor son is walking while he is riding. So the man came down from the donkey and put his son on the donkey. And after a while of walking, they came across another group of people and they said, look at this son, he is so disrespectful. The father is walking and the son is riding on the donkey. So they decided to ride the donkey together. So both of them started riding on the donkey. A little while later, they came to a fourth group. And the fourth group of people said, look at how these inhumane people are sitting on the donkey Two of them, the poor donkey must be so tired. So they ended up actually coming down from the donkey and carrying the donkey instead. And so this is what happens when we blindly follow what people say. This is a kind of illogical reasoning, because people will come up with all different kinds of opinions. And opinions from non-experts or from lay people really don't matter at all in Islam. We don't care about the opinions of those who are not learned. We only give credence to opinions of learned people and to evidence. That is what Islam teaches. And similarly, when you look at the Holy Quran, the Quran also always presents logical arguments. The Quran uses arguments, for example, when proving the oneness of Allah Azzawajal. لو كان فيهما آلهة إلا الله لفسدتا. If there was a God other than Allah in this universe, in the heavens and the earth, then the heavens and the earth would collapse. There would be chaos. Why? Because when there are two lords and two gods, one God will say go right, the other will say go left, and there will be chaos. This is a logical kind of reasoning that the Quran presents. Similarly, when talking about the Holy Quran, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. Don't they ponder upon the Quran? If the Quran was from other than Allah, they would find many discrepancies in it. Because we know that the Quran was revealed over a period of 23 years. And we find that there is no discrepancy in the Quran. There is no contradiction in the Quran. This itself proves that it is revealed from Allah Azzawajal. For it is beyond the ability of a human being to present something over such a long span of time without any contradiction. This is a logical argument. So the Quran itself also produces logical arguments. And even when we look at the seerah of the Holy Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, they would regularly use logical arguments and reasoning to explain things to their interlocutors. It's very important to understand this. And when we look at history, we find that Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, Imam Ali alayhi salam, all the Aimma alayhi salam, whenever they got an opportunity, they would use this kind of reasoning. We find in our traditions questions like, is it possible for Allah Azza wa Jal to put the entire creation inside an egg without expanding the egg or without shrinking the creation? And then the Imam goes on to explain these things. So these are logical kinds of questions, philosophical questions. The Imams would entertain these questions and they would try and explain to their students and to those who were interested in learning about this. On the other hand, we have science, modern science, which, as we saw in the beginning, Sayyid Hussein Nasr says, is a profane thing because it is separated from the sacred. Now, modern science reduces everything to material causes, and that is why there is this whole ethos of materialism that is actually encouraged and supported by modern science. They want to reduce everything to material causes. Even if you ask them about emotions, why is somebody angry? They will say, oh, because there's a chemical imbalance in the brain. They don't want to look at anything metaphysical. It is all physical and material. And with this kind of material attitude, you find that human beings then also become materialistic, because the whole idea of truth is based on material causes. Everything is based on material. And so people become materialistic. They begin to go after the dunya. They forget the akhirah. So science actually leads, and I'm talking about modern science, present day science, actually pushes people towards the dunya, pushes people towards material ideas and thinking about the dunya. And when you talk about the dunya, who better to turn to explain to us the reality of the dunya than Amirul Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. We find in Nahjul Balagha, he gives us so many definitions and descriptions of this dunya. Allahu Akbar. And what he thinks of this dunya. Let us look at a couple of examples and then we can move on. He says, إنما مثل الدنيا مثل الحية لين مسها قاتل سمها. The example of this world is like that of a snake. It is soft to the touch, but its poison is deadly. In another place in Nahjul Balagha, he says, دنياكم هذه أزهد عندي من عفطة عنز. This world of yours is lower in my eyes than the snot of a goat. Allahu Akbar. What is the value of the snot of a goat? That is the example Imam Ali alayhi salam gives for the value of this dunya in his eyes. In another place he says, Wallahi لدنياكم هذه أهون في عيني من عراق خنزير في يدي مجذوم. By Allah, your dunya, this dunya of yours, has lower value in my eyes than the dry bone of a pig in the hand of a leper. Allahu Akbar. Look at the description. With these kinds of descriptions, Imam Ali alayhi salam is trying to show us that the true value of this dunya is that it is something of very little value in and of itself. The only thing that gives it value is being able to use it to acquire the pleasure of Allah Azzawajal and to acquire the hereafter. Otherwise, the dunya in and of itself has very little value. Yet we find people are always constantly after the dunya, and they constantly try and improve their state in the dunya for the dunya. And Rumi has a very interesting example he gives. He says, building your dunya is like building your house on your neighbor's plot of land. One day the knock is there on the door and the neighbor says, you have built this on my plot of land, now you have to move. And you cannot say anything. You cannot say, but I built this house, but the plot of land belongs to your neighbor, so you have to move. And therefore we realize that science and Islam are completely compatible, but the materialistic attitude of science, modern day science, is not compatible with Islam in the sense of trying to reduce all causes to material causes. Islam teaches us that there are immaterial causes as well, and there is something more important than this world, than this physical world, and that is the hereafter. Sallu ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Let us now turn to the Masa'ib of Abba Abdullah al-Hussain alayhi salam. Tonight we want to commemorate and remember one of the close friends of Abba Abdullah by the name of Habib ibn Madahir. Habib, and his name is Habib, and he was the Habib of Hussein. It has been said that at one time Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, when Habib was a young child, he carried Habib and he placed him on his lap and he started showing him affection. The companions asked him, Ya Rasulullah, why are you showing this young child affection and love? He said, because he is the Habib of my Hussein. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. From the 3rd of Muharram, whenever a group of the enemy would enter into Karbala, the ground of Karbala would shake. And the hooves of the horses that they rode into Karbala would cause the whole ground to shake, and the children would begin to cry out of fear, and the women folk would become frightened. One time, Zainab alayhi salam came to Abba Abdullah and said, "Oh Abba Abdullah, we are seeing how the enemies are coming one after the other. Do you not have any Habib whom you can invite to come and support you?" At that moment, Imam Hussein alayhi salam remembers his childhood friend, and he writes a letter to Habib. He says, "Min Hussein ibn Ali ila rajulin faqih. O Habib, I have been surrounded in Karbala. Come to my assistance, O Habib." He sends that letter with a messenger, and at that time Kufa is under curfew. So the messenger comes in the night, slowly coming to the house of Habib and knocks on the door. Habib wondered who is at the door at this time of night, given the curfew in the city. He opens the door and he finds the messenger of Hussein. He says, "Ana baridul Hussein," or "Ana rasulul Hussein." And Habib opens the door and takes the letter. The first thing that he does is he kisses the letter of Abba Abdullah, and then he opens the letter, and as he reads the letter, tears begin trickling down his cheeks. His wife asks, "Oh Habib, who is this letter from?" Habib says, "This letter is from Hussein ibn Ali. He has been surrounded in Karbala and he wants me to join him and assist him." So his wife says, "Oh Habib, why are you hesitant?" Habib says, "I am thinking about you, oh my dear wife. If I go, then who will be with you?" At that moment, we are told that the wife of Habib said, "Oh Habib, if you will not go to help that son of Zahra, then you can sit here and I will go and assist him. Ajrukum ala Allah." Habib smiled and said, "As long as you are pleased with it, I will go and assist Abba Abdullah. I was just testing you to see what you will say." And then Habib tells his servant to take the horse and stand outside the city, telling him that in the middle of the night he will join them. The servant takes the horse and waits outside the gates of Kufa. In the middle of the night, Habib is delayed in going and joining his servant. When he reaches his servant, he overhears his servant talking to the horse. We are told the servant was telling the horse, "Oh horse, my master Habib has been delayed. If he does not come, bear witness that I will sit on you and go and ride to help Abba Abdullah al-Hussein." Habib was very pleased when he heard this. He took the horse and he rode to Karbala. In the meantime, in Karbala, we are told that Abba Abdullah al-Hussein had made banners and flags, and he had given each flag to each companion. And then there was one flag that was extra. So he was asked that you have made an extra flag. He said, "No, the one who will bear this flag is on his way." And when Habib comes, there is rejoicing in the camp of Abba Abdullah. There is sound of takbir in the camp of Abba Abdullah. At that moment, when the women folk hear rejoicing and takbir, Zainab asks Fizza, "Oh Fizza, go and find out why they are rejoicing." Fizza comes back and says, "Oh my lady, Habib ibn Madahir has come." So Zainab says, "Oh Fizza, go and give my salams to Habib." Allahu Akbar. Fizza goes and gives salam to Habib. Habib takes sand from Karbala and puts it on his head. He says, "The day has come when Saniya Zahra will give salams to someone like me." Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. We are told that Habib ibn Madahir, even though he was over 70 years in age, he fought very bravely. And along with him, there was another elderly companion, Muslim ibn Awsaja. Habib and Muslim were fighting together. And when Muslim ibn Awsaja fell to the ground, Muslim was much older. He was about 90 years old. When he fell to the ground, Habib goes to him and he says, "Oh Muslim, do you have any wasiyah?" Muslim could not talk, but he pointed at Abba Abdullah and said, "Usika bihada. I give you my wasiyah to protect Abba Abdullah al-Hussein. Let nothing happen to him while you are still alive." Ajrukum ala Allah. Finally, it was Habib's turn. Habib went to fight. He killed many of the ashqiya, and then he fell to the ground of Karbala. Allahu Akbar. He gave his final salams. Assalamu alayka ya Abba Abdullah. Upon hearing this, Imam Hussain alayhi salam rushed to the side of Habib. He took him in his arms. How lucky you are, Habib. You died in the arms of Abba Abdullah al-Hussein. Of course, there will come a time when Hussein will be alone in Karbala, and he will look around and he will call out, "Where are you, O Habib? Where are you, O Abbas?" And there will be no reply from any of his companions or any of his family. And that is the time when the Imam will be alone in Karbala. And when the Imam falls onto the land of Karbala, there will be no one to hold him. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا آل محمد أي منقلب ينقلبون.
یا حسین یا حسین، جب ردا سر سے چھنی میں صدا دیتی رہی، تو نہ آیا غازی. جب ردا سر سے چھنی میں صدا دیتی رہی، تو نہ آیا غازی. آل عمران کہاں اور زندان کہاں، یہ بہن قید ہوئی، تو نہ آیا غازی. جب ردا سر سے چھنی میں صدا دیتی رہی، تو نہ آیا غازی. ہم کو پانی نہ ملے تیری خوشبو تو رہے، تیرے بازو نہ کٹے چاہے مشکی زچ دے، یہ مگر ہو نہ سکا تیرے بازو ہیں جدا. مجھ پہ ہے تشنہ لبی، تو نہ آیا غازی. جب ردا سر سے چھنی میں صدا دیتی رہی، تو نہ آیا غازی. دھوپ میں تو تھا شجر، تجھ سے آباد تھا گھر، ہے برہنا میرا سر، کیا نہیں تجھ کو خبر. اے علمدار وفا اس بہن کو باخدا، تجھ سے ڈھارس تھی بڑی، تو نہ آیا غازی. جب ردا سر سے چھنی میں صدا دیتی رہی، تو نہ آیا غازی. آ گئی شام علم، لٹ گئے اہل حرم، ریت پر جلتی ہوئی ہو گیا ٹھنڈا علم. پرسہ دینے کے لیے مجھ سے ملنے کے لیے آ گئے بابا علی، تو نہ آیا غازی. جب ردا سر سے چھنی میں صدا دیتی رہی، تو نہ آیا غازی. کیا کہوں شعر میرے بےردا ہم کو لیے، یہ مسلمان سارے شہر در شہر گئے. خلقت کوفہ کبھی، خلقت شام کبھی، بارہا ہم پہ ہنسی، تو نہ آیا غازی. جب ردا سر سے چھنی میں صدا دیتی رہی، تو نہ آیا غازی، جب ردا سر سے چھنی میں صدا دیتی رہی، تو نہ آیا غازی۔ کتنی بے بس تھی بہن اے شہنشاہ وفا، نام لے لے کے میرا جب یہ ظالم نے کہا، ناز تھا جس پہ تجھے اب بلاؤ نہ اسے، اور میں روتی رہی تو نہ آیا غازی، جب ردا سر سے چھنی میں صدا دیتی رہی تو نہ آیا غازی، جب ردا سر سے چھنی میں صدا دیتی رہی تو نہ آیا غازی۔ یا حسین یا حسین۔
عباس 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 عباس، محفوظ قافلہ ہے عباس جو زندہ ہے، محفوظ قافلہ ہے عباس جو زندہ ہے، ابھی دور کربلا ہے، ابھی دور کربلا ہے، ابھی دور کربلا ہے، عباس جو زندہ ہے، عباس جو زندہ ہے، عباس جو زندہ ہے۔ اس نوری کارواں میں نوری ہماری آنکھیں، نوری ہماریوں میں نوری سواریاں ہیں، نوری سواریاں ہیں، سر پر علم کھلا ہے عباس جو زندہ ہے، ابھی دور کربلا ہے، ابھی دور کربلا ہے، ابھی دور کربلا ہے، عباس جو زندہ ہے، عباس جو زندہ ہے، عباس جو زندہ ہے۔ نامحرموں کا مجمع ہٹ ہٹ کے ہے گزرتا، پہرے میں باوفا کا طے ہو رہا ہے رستا، طے ہو رہا ہے رستا، ہے کیا شان و دبدبا ہے عباس جو زندہ ہے، ابھی دور کربلا ہے، ابھی دور کربلا ہے، ابھی دور کربلا ہے، عباس جو زندہ ہے، عباس جو زندہ ہے، عباس جو زندہ ہے۔ عباس جیسا بھائی سالار کارواں ہے، بولے حسین مجھ کو پھر کوئی غم کہاں ہے، پھر کوئی غم کہاں ہے، ہر غم کی یہ دوا ہے عباس جو زندہ ہے، عباس جو زندہ ہے، عباس جو زندہ ہے۔ زینب حیا کی ملکہ کلثوم اور رقیہ، لیلا رباب فروا کبرا، سکینہ فیضا کبرا، सकीना फिजा हर बीबी बारिदा है अब्बा से जो जिंदा है अभी दूर करबला है अभी दूर करबला है अभी दूर करबला है अब्बा से जो जिंदा है असग़र से खेलती है खुश है बहुत सकीना जब चाहती है सोना है बाजा का सीना है बाजा का सीना हमसे नाशना है अब्बा से जो जिंदा है अब्बा से जो जिंदा है अभी दूर करबला है अभी दूर करबला है अभी दूर करबला है अब्बा से जो जिंदा है अब्बा से जो जिंदा है
बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम अस्सलामु अलैका या सय्यदी व या मौलाय या रसूल अल्लाह या हबीब अल्लाह या खैर खल्क़िल्लाह या मुहम्मद इब्न अब्दिल्लाह अस्सलामु अलैका या सय्यदी व या मौलाय या अली अमीर المؤمنين अस्सलामु अलैकी या सय्यदती व या मौलाती फातिमा الزهراء सय्यदतु निसाء العالمين السلام عليك يا سيدتي ويا مولاتي يا خديجة الكبرى أم المؤمنين السلام عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا حسن المجتبى السلام عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا حسين سيد الشهداء السلام عليك وعلى ولديك العليين وأخيك بالفضل العباس وأختيك زينب وأم كلثوم وسائر المستشهدين والمجاهدين بين يديك السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام على أئمة التسعة من ولد الحسين علي زين العابدين ومحمد الباقر وجعفر الصادق وموسى الكاظم وعلي الرضا ومحمد الجواد وعلي الهادي والحسن الزكي العسكري السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان الحجة المنتظر المهدي سيدي عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك واجعلنا من أنصارك وأعوانك ومن المستشهدين بين يديك والسلام عليكم يا أهل بيت النبوة جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته